My soul tore apart in the endless dark, the final bolt of celestial lightning more than I could have ever anticipated. 10,000 years of discipline, and I was just one step away from true transcendence. A shame, such a shame. In the last moment, as my consciousness dissolved, I had only one obsessive thought. If I could do it all over again, I would never set foot on this cold, emotionless path to godhood. I wanted to go back to that summer, drink an ice-cold soda, and see her one more time. Ethan, just sign it. A cold voice pulled me from the chaos. I opened my eyes, squinting against a harsh white light. The ceiling above was familiar and strange all at once. The air smelled of antiseptic, mixed with the faint, cool fragrance that was uniquely hers. I turned my head and saw her. Isabella, my wife. She stood there in a tailored power suit that made her look tall, proud, and alone. Her face, a face that could launch 1,000 ships, was a perfect, emotionless mask, a glacier that hadn't thawed in millennia. She held a file out to me. Divorce papers. The memories flooded back in a tidal wave. 3 years ago, I married into the Rossi family and became the biggest joke in Port Sterling. Everyone said it was a case of a frog catching a princess, a nobody orphan who'd hit the Powerball jackpot to marry Isabella Rossi, the heiress to the Rossi empire. But only we knew the truth. This marriage was a sham. For 3 years, we slept in separate rooms. We'd spoken maybe 100 words total. In the Rossi estate, I was less than a ghost, a piece of furniture that endured the constant, withering glares of my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. And today was the 7th day since the death of Isabella's grandfather, Marco, the only person who had championed our marriage. Now, she was finally free to get rid of me without reservation. Why? I heard a dry, raspy voice ask. It was my voice, but not my voice. It was hollow, filled with a pathetic, pleading confusion. It belonged to Ethan Chase, the loser. But I was the master of 1,000 realms, worshipped by countless beings across the cosmos. My mind was supposed to be a placid ocean, unstirred by mortal cares. Yet, as my gaze met hers and I saw the deep, hidden exhaustion in her eyes, my heart, this heart that should have been as hard as diamond, gave a painful twitch. I remembered everything. In my last life, it was on this very day that I signed these papers. I was thrown out of the Rossi family, ending up broke and homeless. Not long after, I heard the news. Rossi Industries had been sabotaged, collapsing overnight. And Isabella died in a bizarre car crash. My world had turned to ash. With nothing left to live for, I accidentally fell from a cliff during a hike and found myself reborn in a world of cosmic cultivation. I thought it was a new beginning. I trained like a man possessed, driven by a single goal, to become strong enough to tear through space and time, to get back to her. It took me 10,000 years to go from a mere mortal to a being on the verge of ascension. And in the end, I still failed, struck down by the laws of the universe itself. I thought that was it. I never imagined fate would give me a second chance. Not a new world, but a new beginning. Right back at the crossroads where our lives diverged. This time, I wasn't a penniless orphan. I was a master of cosmic forces. There is no why. Isabella's voice was still arctic. Ethan, we're not right for each other. I know these 3 years have been hard on you. There's $3 million in this account. Consider it compensation. Sign the papers, and we can both move on. She placed a black debit card and a pen on top of the document, pushing it toward me. Her mother, Maria, immediately chimed in, her voice dripping with acid. Bella, you're too soft. Why are you even talking to him? $3 million is too good for a freeloader like him. Just make him sign, so we can get his bad luck out of our house. Her younger sister, Sophia, leaned against the wall with her arms crossed, her expression one of pure contempt. She's right, sis. Look at him. He's too pathetic to even speak. Once you divorce him, you can finally be with a man who actually deserves you. Like Blake Vanderbilt. Now that the power couple, Blake Vanderbilt, a flicker of cold, imperceptible light flashed in my eyes. I remember that name. In my past life, he was the architect of the plot against the Rossi family. He was the one responsible for Isabella's death. Are you finished? I spoke slowly. My voice wasn't loud, but the shrill chatter in the hospital room instantly fell silent. Maria and Sophia just stared, their mouths hanging open as if they were seeing me for the first time. In their minds, I was a spineless doormat who never dared to raise his voice. Isabella looked up too, her perfect eyebrows knitting together in surprise. I ignored them, my eyes fixed on Isabella. I spoke each word with deliberate clarity. I'm not signing this, and we are not getting a divorce. 10,000 years of cultivation had severed all my worldly attachments, all but one, my obsession with her. It was the flaw in my heart that caused my downfall, and it was the anchor that pulled me back to this life. Now that I was back, I would personally erase every last regret. Are you insane? Maria was the first to snap out of it, jabbing a finger at my face. You ungrateful leech. We fed you and housed you for 3 years, and now we're paying you $3 million to leave, and you're refusing? Is your skin made of concrete? See, sis? I told you he was no good. He's just trying to scam more money out of us. Sophia added. Isabella's expression grew colder, her eyes filled with a deep, profound disappointment. From her perspective, my sudden defiance was just the greedy, last-ditch effort of a cornered animal. I didn't explain. They didn't deserve an explanation. I reached out and picked up the divorce agreement. Just as they thought I was about to sign, I rubbed my hands together gently. Ryup. The thick stack of legal paper disintegrated in my hands, turning into a snowstorm of confetti that drifted silently down onto the hospital bed. The room was plunged into a dead silence. Maria and Sophia's jaws dropped wide enough to fit a baseball. Even Isabella's calm, stoic eyes finally showed a ripple of emotion. She stared at me, a look of pure shock and disbelief on her face. She couldn't understand it. How could the loser who couldn't even twist open a pickle jar have this kind of strength? Of course, it wasn't strength. It was spiritual energy, the barest fraction of what I once commanded, but more than enough for this. I said, "We're not getting a divorce," I repeated calmly, looking directly at her. Then I threw back the covers and got out of bed. 3 days ago, the original Ethan had fallen from a cliff while trying to pick some rare herb for Isabella, which is how I got here. The body was weak, but I could move. What do you think you're doing? Maria instinctively took a step back. I didn't even look at her. I walked over to Isabella, picked up the debit card, and gently placed it back in her hand. Her hand was cold. I won't take a single penny of your money, I said, looking into her eyes. From this day on, I'm going to show you who your husband really is. With that, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving a wake of stunned silence behind me. I knew from this moment on, everything was about to change. This time, I, Ethan Chase, would command my own destiny. The heavens would no longer blind me. The earth would no longer bury her heart. All of creation would learn my will, and any gods in my way would turn to dust. But first, I had to reintroduce myself to my wife. I stepped out of the room and took a deep breath of the sterile, disinfectant-laced air of the hospital corridor. The spiritual energy in this world was pathetically thin. I did a quick scan of this body. The fall had caused serious injuries, multiple fractures, and internal bruising. A normal person would be bedridden in for 3 months. For me, these were flesh wounds. I channeled the tiny wisp of power left in me, sending it like a warm, trickling stream through my damaged meridians and bones. A pleasant, tingling warmth spread through me. In less than 10 minutes, I was about 70% healed. Ethan, you get back here. Maria's shrill, furious voice echoed from behind me. She and Sophia had chased me out, with Isabella following at a distance. Her face was still an icy mask, but her eyes were locked on me, filled with a new, probing curiosity. So the loser grew a spine. Huh? Tearing up the papers. Who the hell do you think you are? Maria shrieked, spittle flying from her mouth. I stopped and turned to face her. The old Ethan would have already been bowing his head and stammering an apology. But I wasn't him. Mom, I said calmly, the word feeling foreign on my tongue. Grandfather's barely cold in his grave, and you're here forcing his granddaughter to get a divorce. Is that really appropriate? Maria was struck speechless, her face flushing a deep red. You dare lecture me? If it weren't for you, you bad luck charm, the old man wouldn't have died so soon, she sputtered, grasping at straws. Mom, what are you saying? Isabella finally cut in, her voice edged with anger. But Maria was on a roll. Just as she was about to launch into another tirade, her face went pale. She clutched her chest, and her body went limp. Mom, Mom, what's wrong? Isabella and Sophia's faces drained of color as they rushed to catch her. Maria's lips were turning blue. Her breathing was ragged, and fat beads of sweat dripped from her forehead. Call a doctor, quick! Isabella yelled at Sophia, her voice shaking as she tried to find a pressure point on her mother's hand. Sophia, panicking, fumbled for the emergency call button on the wall. The hallway erupted into chaos. I watched the scene unfold, my expression calm. Maria had a hereditary heart condition. In my past life, this was when she had her first major attack. They'd saved her, but it had left her weakened, and she died a few years later. A doctor and 2 nurses came running with a crash cart. What's the situation? My mother. She just collapsed. She has a history of heart problems. Isabella answered frantically. The doctor did a quick check, his face grim. It's bad. Acute myocardial infarction. Where's the elevator? We need to get her to the OR now. Just then, a head nurse ran back, her face a mask of despair. Doctor, it's no good. The elevators just went down for emergency maintenance. We don't know when they'll be back up. What? The doctor's face fell. We're on the 5th floor. The patient can't survive being carried down 5 flights of stairs in her condition. The color drained completely from Isabella's face. She looked at her mother, who was now semi-conscious on the gurney, and swayed on her feet. What do we do? What do we do? Sophia was already sobbing. Just as everyone stood there, helpless and gripped by despair, I walked forward. Step aside. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the chaos like a knife. Ethan, what are you doing here? Get out of the way. Don't cause more trouble. Sophia screamed at me, her eyes red. Isabella looked up, her gaze complicated. Ethan, this is not the time for games. I ignored them and walked directly to the gurney. The lead doctor frowned. Who are you? Sir, please don't interfere with medical personnel. I placed my hand on Maria's wrist. This is absurd. The patient is in critical condition. The doctor's words caught in his throat. Because I had started to move, I brought my index and middle fingers together and began to press, tap, and rub several points on Maria's chest in a pattern that was both arcane and precise. My movements were unhurried, almost slow, but each touch carried an imperceptible pulse of spiritual energy, penetrating her skin to gently stimulate her failing heart. It was a simplified version of a basic healing art, used to reignite a person's life force. What are you doing? Stop. If something happens, can you take responsibility? The doctor shouted, a mix of anger and shock on his face as he reached out to pull me away. Don't. Isabella's voice cut through the air. She had stepped between me and the doctor. Everyone stared at her in astonishment. She couldn't explain why she did it. Logic told her that what Ethan was doing was insane. But looking into his calm, focused eyes, an inexplicable sense of trust bloomed in her heart. It was as if, with this man here, any problem could be solved. Bella, are you crazy? You really think this loser can save Mom? Sophia cried in disbelief. Just then a nurse gasped. Look, the patient's color. It's getting better. All eyes snapped to the gurney. Maria, whose lips had been blue and her skin ashen, was visibly regaining a healthy, pinkish hue. Her ragged breaths were evening out, becoming deep and steady. On the heart monitor, the chaotic, jagged line was smoothing into a regular rhythm. That's impossible, the doctor muttered, his eyes wide. He'd been a doctor for decades and had never seen anything so miraculous. A few minutes later, I withdrew my hand. She's fine now, I said simply. As if on cue, Maria's eyes fluttered open. She looked around, confused. What happened to me? Mom, you're awake. Sophia threw herself forward. Isabella let out a long, shaky breath, her eyes fixed on me, filled with a level of shock and bewilderment she had never felt before. Who is he? Is this really the same pathetic husband who's been living in my house for 3 years? The patient is stable for now, but we still need to run a full workup, the doctor said, collecting himself. His tone had shifted from commanding to deferential. Sir, may I ask what kind of massage technique that was? It was simply miraculous. I had no intention of explaining. Just some old family acupressure techniques. Nothing special. I turned to Isabella. Let's go home. Isabella stared at my calm profile for a moment. Then, to her own surprise, she nodded. She told Sophia to stay with their mother and followed me out of the hospital. The ride home was silent. She opened her mouth to speak several times, but didn't know what to ask. Everything that had happened today had completely shattered her perception of me. The strength to rip apart a legal document, the medical skill to save her mother. It was as if this man was shrouded in a thick fog of mystery. Back at the Rossi estate, I went straight to the kitchen. "What are you doing?" she asked, following me in. "Making dinner," I said, expertly pulling ingredients from the Sub-Zero refrigerator. She froze again. In 3 years, I had never once set foot in the kitchen. They had a housekeeper for that, and I was happy to stay out of the way. "You know how to cook?" "A little." I didn't elaborate. I washed the vegetables, chopped them, and fired up the stove, my movements fluid and confident. Before long, 3 dishes and a soup were on the dining room table. Braised short ribs, roasted asparagus, a simple risotto, and a light chicken broth. The most basic of home-cooked meals. But Isabella smelled an intoxicating aroma she'd never encountered before. Just breathing it in seemed to soothe her soul, melting away the exhaustion of the past few days. "Try it," I said, serving her a portion. She hesitated for a second, then picked up her fork and took a bite of the short rib. The moment it touched her tongue, her eyes widened. The flavor was indescribable. It was rich, tender, and savory without being greasy. A warm current flowed down into her stomach and spread through her entire body, leaving her feeling unbelievably comfortable. She couldn't help but take a bite of the asparagus. It was crisp and fresh, with an earthy fragrance that felt like it was purifying her from the inside out. She had never tasted anything so delicious in her life. How did you make this?" she couldn't help but ask. "Just threw it together," I replied casually. Of course, it wasn't just thrown together. I had infused a trace of spiritual energy into every dish. For a mortal, eating it would not only strengthen their body, but also cleanse the impurities from their system. Isabella finished her entire plate, and even had a second helping, something she never did. After dinner, she watched me quietly washing the dishes in the kitchen, her expression complex. "Ethan," she finally said. Who are you really?" I rinsed the last plate, dried my hands, and turned to face her. "I'm your husband." I walked toward her, and for the first time, I took her hand in mine. Her hand was still cold, but this time, she didn't pull away. Her body tensed for a moment, and then she just let me hold it. I could feel it. The glacier was beginning to melt. The next day was the memorial gathering for her grandfather, Marco Rossi, which would have been his 70th birthday. Though he was gone, the event had been planned for months, the invitations sent. It had to go on, but the celebratory mood was replaced with a somber, oppressive atmosphere. The Rossi family was old money in Port Sterling. They had seen better days, but they were still a force to be reckoned with. The line of luxury cars parked outside the estate stretched down the block. When Isabella and I walked into the grand ballroom together, I turned to us. She was a queen in a simple, elegant black dress, radiating a cold, untouchable beauty. I was in a pair of khakis and a polo shirt I'd picked up at Target, completely out of place. "Hey, isn't that the Rossi family's live-in loser? What's he doing here?" I heard Isabella was going to divorce him the second the old man died. Why is he still hanging around? Look at how cheap he looks. Standing next to her, it's just an insult. The whispers were not subtle, dripping with scorn and ridicule. Isabella's brow furrowed, and she subconsciously started to edge away from me. I acted as if I hadn't heard a thing. My composure was absolute. The state of mind of a cosmic master couldn't be shaken by the gossip of mortals. Just then, a handsome young man in a sharp white suit glided over, a glass of champagne in his hand. "Bella, you made it." His eyes were locked on Isabella, full of undisguised adoration. Then he shot me a dismissive glance. "And this must be Ethan. I've heard so much about you." Blake Vanderbilt, heir to the up-and-coming Vanderbilt fortune and Isabella's most persistent suitor. In my last life, he was the one who destroyed her company and got her killed. I looked at him, and a cold light glinted deep in my eyes. Isabella gave him a chilly nod, a perfunctory greeting. Blake didn't seem to mind. He smiled at her. "Bella, my condolences. I was so sorry to hear about your grandfather. You're carrying the weight of the entire Rossi company on your shoulders now. It must be exhausting. My father was just saying he'd love to find a way for our companies to collaborate to help you share the burden. His words were slick with concern, but I knew a predator when I saw one. The Vanderbilts have been circling Rossi Industries for years. Thank you for your concern, Blake, but we don't need any outside help, Isabella replied coldly. Rebuffed, Blake's smile tightened. He turned his attention to me. Ethan, my man, today is a big day for the Rossi family. I'm curious, what kind of gift did you prepare? Let's see it enlighten us all. He raised his voice, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. A wave of smug, expectant faces turned toward me. Everyone knew I was a freeloader. What kind of gift could I possibly afford? Isabella's face paled. She knew Blake was doing this just to humiliate me. I just smiled, reached into my pocket, and pulled out a small, simple wooden box. Just a little something, a small token of respect. Blake took the box and opened it for everyone to see. Inside lay a single, unremarkable jade pendant. The stone was cloudy, and the carving was crude. Someone snorted. Then, the whole room erupted in muffled laughter. I thought it was some kind of treasure. It's just a piece of junk jade. You could buy a dozen of those for $20 at a street fair. He actually has the nerve to give that as a gift. This is priceless. How did the Rossis end up with such a pathetic son-in-law? Isabella's face was ashen. She thought bringing me today had been a terrible mistake. Maria and Sophia looked like they wanted the floor to swallow them whole. Blake dangled the pendant from his fingers triumphantly. Ethan, this is a truly unique gift. But it's the thought that counts, right? Ha. His laughter was pure mockery. But I remained perfectly calm. I looked at him and said coolly, that is a serenity jade. Worn over time, it calms the mind, nourishes the spirit, and wards off illness. Of course, it wasn't ordinary jade. I had spent the night infusing it with a sliver of my core spiritual energy, carving microscopic arrays for gathering energy and soothing the soul. It was a crude magical artifact, but for a mortal, it was a priceless treasure. Ha, serenity jade? Why don't you just say it was worn by an angel? Blake laughed even harder. Ethan, have you been reading too many fantasy novels? Another wave of laughter rolled through the crowd. Only Isabella, looking at my calm expression, felt a seed of doubt. She remembered my miraculous acupressure at the hospital. What if this pendant was more than it seemed? All right, I'm done joking around, Blake said, tossing the jade onto a nearby table like it was garbage. He then produced an exquisite velvet box from his pocket. Bella, this is something I acquired for your grandfather at a Sotheby's auction. A flawless blue diamond from South Africa, the heart of the Atlantic. May he rest in peace. He opened the box. A massive, brilliant blue diamond glittered under the chandeliers, dazzling everyone who saw it. Wow, what a stunning diamond. That must be worth tens of millions. Blake is so generous. Now that's a gift worthy of the Rossi family. The guests gasped in admiration, their glances toward me now filled with even more contempt. Next to the heart of the Atlantic, my junk jade looked utterly pathetic. Blake basked in the praise, looking expectantly at Isabella. He thought he would see gratitude in her eyes, but he was stunned to see that her gaze was fixed on the jade pendant he'd tossed on the table. She hesitated for a moment, then walked over and quietly picked it up. Blake's face darkened instantly. The memorial dinner began, the mood heavy. After a few cursory bites, the guests began to network. Blake made a beeline for the main family table and sat down next to Isabella. Bella, about what I mentioned earlier. You should seriously consider it, he said, lowering his voice. The city is about to open up bidding for the Southbridge development plot. That land is central to the city's 10-year plan. Whoever gets it will control the future of business in Port Sterling. We Vanderbilts are fully prepared. If our families join forces, that land is as good as ours. Isabella's knuckles turned white. She knew how crucial the Southbridge plot was. Rossi Industries was at a critical juncture. Winning that bid would solve all their problems and restore them to their former glory. But she also knew Blake was a shark. Partnering with him was like making a deal with the devil. A partnership is possible, but Rossi Industries must have the controlling interest, Isabella stated coldly. Bella, you're making things difficult, Blake chuckled. You know the position your company is in. Your credit is maxed out. You're losing top talent. What leverage do you have to demand control? I'm offering you a seat at the table out of respect for your grandfather. His words were polite, but the threat was clear. Isabella looked ill, but couldn't refute him. He was right. I'll inject $5 billion into the project, Blake said, finally showing his hand. But the new venture will be managed by my people. You can be a silent partner, a vice president in name only, and collect your dividends every year. This wasn't a partnership. This was a hostile takeover, a vulture picking at a carcass. He was trying to swallow the future of her company for a mere $5 billion. In your dreams. Isabella trembled with rage. Bella, don't get emotional, Blake said, leaning back, completely confident. I'm giving you a chance. If you don't take it, don't blame me. Without the Vanderbilts, do you really think you can fend for yourselves against the other wolves? And by the way, he added, I heard the Leaf family from the state capitol is also bidding. You know how powerful they are. Without me, you won't even have a ticket to the game. The Leaf family? Isabella's face went completely white. The Leaf family was a corporate behemoth, with assets 10 times that of the Rossis. If they were involved, she stood no chance. Seeing her crestfallen expression, Blake's smile widened. This was what he wanted, to break her spirit, then make her submit. The rest of the table was silent. The Rossi relatives all looked worried, but no one dared to speak. Maria was practically vibrating with anxiety, shooting Isabella frantic looks, urging her to just agree. Just as Isabella was about to break, a voice cut through the tension. $5 billion for the most valuable piece of real estate in the city? Mr. Vanderbilt, are you dreaming? Or do you just think everyone at this table is an idiot? It was me. I was calmly eating a piece of short rib, as if I were discussing the weather. Every head at the table snapped in my direction. Blake's face hardened. Ethan, does this conversation concern you? This is business. Adults are talking. Ethan, what do you know? Shut up and don't make things worse. Sophia hissed, stomping her foot. Isabella shot me a warning look. I put down my fork, wiped my mouth with a napkin, and looked at Blake with a faint smile. You really think you have this all sewn up, don't you? I stood up and walked over to him, my voice low, but carrying clearly across the table. When you say you're fully prepared, do you mean how you bribed the deputy commissioner of the city planning department to get the confidential reserve price and zoning details ahead of time? Blake's pupils contracted. The smile froze on his face. He had kept that transaction completely secret. How could this useless freeloader possibly know? I ignored his shock and continued. In your partnership with the Rossi family, that's just a plan to use their local connections and existing properties in Southbridge, right? Once the project is underway, you'll use loopholes in the contract to kick them out and maybe even launch a reverse takeover of Rossi Industries itself. Beads of sweat formed on Blake's forehead. He wanted to deny it, but every word I said was the absolute truth. As for the Lee family from the state capitol, I sneered, they're coming to Port Sterling, but not for the Southbridge plot. Their target is the port expansion project. You leaked that false rumor just to pressure Bella, to throw her off balance, so she'd accept your ridiculous terms. Killing 3 birds with 1 stone. Very clever. With every sentence I spoke, the color drained further from Blake's face. By the end, he was as pale as a ghost, staring at me, as if he'd seen a monster. The table was utterly silent. Everyone was looking at me like I was some kind of alien. Isabella's beautiful eyes were wide with disbelief. She could not fathom how the husband she had looked down on for 3 years possessed such terrifying insight and analytical ability. He hadn't just seen through Blake's scheme. He even knew the strategic movements of a corporation from the state capitol. Was this the same useless Ethan Chase? You're lying. Blake finally managed to stammer, his voice shrill. Am I? You know the truth, I said, patting his shoulder. I leaned in close, whispering so only he could hear. I also know that your friend, the deputy commissioner, he's going to be arrested for corruption in 3 days. That Patek Philippe watch you gave him is going to be the key piece of evidence. Now, tell me, how confident are you in your plan? Boom. It was as if Blake had been struck by lightning. He shuddered violently and collapsed back into his chair, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. The deputy commissioner was going to be arrested? That was a state secret. How could Ethan possibly know? If it was true, his entire plan was a joke. I paid him no more mind. I walked back to my seat and looked at the completely stunned Isabella. We're getting the Southbridge plot ourselves, I stated. Don't worry about the money. I'll have 10 billion ready for you in 3 days. And don't worry about the Leaf family. I'll make them withdraw from the bidding. In fact, they'll be begging to partner with us. My words hung in the air, resonating with an unshakable authority. In that moment, all the scorn and mockery in the ballroom vanished, replaced by a profound, chilling sense of awe. They looked at me as if I were a god, and Isabella, gazing at her familiar yet utterly alien husband, felt her heart, frozen for so long, begin to beat with a fierce, wild rhythm for the first time. The party ended abruptly. Blake, his conspiracy exposed, fled in humiliation. On the way home, the car was silent again. But this time, the silence wasn't cold or awkward. It was charged, electric with unspoken questions. Isabella's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. She kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, her eyes a storm of emotions. Shock, curiosity, disbelief, and a flicker of something she didn't even recognize herself. "Oh, how did you know all of that?" she finally asked, unable to hold back any longer. "I have my sources," I said, leaning back and closing my eyes. I couldn't very well tell her that my spiritual senses could cover the entire city, that I had listened to Blake's secret meetings as if they were live podcasts. My vague answer clearly didn't satisfy her, but she didn't press. She was beginning to understand that the secrets this man held were deeper than she could possibly imagine. We were driving through the city when a light ahead turned red. As the car came to a stop, my eyes snapped open. A flash of cold, murderous intent crossed my vision. "Hold on," I said to Isabella. "What?" She didn't have time to understand. In the next instant, a massive, out-of-control dump truck roared through the red light from a side street, a behemoth of steel barreling directly toward our red Maserati. The speed, the angle, it was a clear assassination attempt. "Ah!" Isabella screamed, her face instantly losing all color. She could only watch as the truck filled her vision, the shadow of death enveloping her. Her mind went blank. She forgot to even breathe, let alone hit the brakes. In that split second, I moved. An invisible, immense wave of energy erupted from my body, forming a shield that enveloped the entire car. Crunch! The sound was deafening. The dump truck slammed into the side of the Maserati. But the expected explosion of twisted metal and shattered glass never came. The small, red sports car barely shuddered under the impact. Not a single scratch marred its paint. Instead, the 10-ton dump truck, as if it had hit an invisible mountain, crumpled. Its entire front end imploded into a mangled wreck. The massive vehicle was thrown back by the force of its own impact, its wheels lifting off the ground before it crashed back down onto the pavement. The driver was slumped over in the crushed cab, his fate unknown. The entire intersection fell silent. Every witness stared, thinking they were hallucinating. Isabella was in a state of shock. She looked from the nearly destroyed truck back to her pristine car, feeling her entire understanding of reality crumble. "Get out," my calm voice said, bringing her back. I unbuckled my seatbelt and opened the door. Isabella followed me out mechanically. A few blocks away, a group of men watching from a dark alley stared in disbelief. What the hell happened? Is that Maserati bulletproof?" "Boss, the mission failed," one of them stammered into a phone. Blake Vanderbilt's furious roar came through the receiver. "Useless. All of you are useless. You can't even take out one woman. Get out of my sight." He was so desperate he had resorted to murder. Pathetic. I snorted, not even bothering with these gnats. My gaze passed through the crowd and settled on the unconscious driver in the truck's cab. I lifted a hand and flicked a finger in his direction. An invisible sliver of energy shot through the air and entered his forehead. He would die in his sleep, painlessly. If you came to kill me, you had to be prepared to die. With that done, I turned to Isabella, who was still trembling from the shock. It wasn't from fear, but from the sheer impossibility of what she had just witnessed. I walked over, took off my jacket, and draped it over her bare shoulders. "It's over." My voice seemed to have a magical quality, instantly calming her chaotic thoughts. She looked up at me. The neon lights of the city painted my face in shifting patterns of light and shadow. In that moment, she felt that the man before her was a stranger who terrified her, and yet a pillar of strength who made her feel completely safe. Police sirens wailed in the distance. I took her hand. It was still cold, but this time she gripped mine tightly. "Let's go home," I said. When we got back to the estate, Maria and Sophia were already asleep. The huge house was quiet, occupied only by Isabella and me. The atmosphere was delicate. She poured me a glass of water and sat on the sofa opposite me, her silence heavy. Her eyes, usually so distant, were now fixed on me, filled with a burning curiosity and confusion. "Whatever you want to ask, just ask," I said, taking a sip of water. She paused for a long moment before speaking, her voice a little hoarse. "Tonight, at the party, and the crash just now. Was that you?" "At the party, I just stated a few facts," I said. "As for the crash," I paused. "Let's just say we were lucky." She didn't believe me, of course. Lucky? Lucky enough for a dump truck to destroy itself against our car without leaving a scratch? But she could tell I wasn't going to say more. "Blake won't let this go," she said, her voice laced with worry. "Him?" I laughed, a sound full of contempt. "He's already a dead man." Isabella looked at me, confused. "You'll see it on the news tomorrow," I said, offering no further explanation. Blake had tried to kill her. For that, he had earned a death sentence. I had 1,000 ways to make him and his family vanish from Port Sterling without a trace. Watching me, so calm and untroubled, Isabella had the absurd feeling that even the biggest problems in the world were nothing more than dust I could casually brush away. This supreme confidence was alien to her, yet strangely reassuring. "It's late. You should get some rest. You have to be at the office tomorrow," I said, standing up to head back to my small guest room, the room I had slept in for 3 years. "Wait." She stopped me. I turned back. A faint blush crept up her cheeks, and she couldn't quite meet my eyes. "Your room. It hasn't been cleaned in a while. Tonight, you can sleep in the master bedroom." After saying it, as if she'd used up all her courage, she looked down at the floor. I was stunned. The master bedroom was her room. In 3 years, this was the first time she had ever invited me in. I looked at the pink tips of her ears and her flustered posture. After 10,000 years, my unshakable heart felt a ripple. So this is what it looks like when a glacier melts. I didn't refuse. The master bedroom was huge, decorated in the same cool, minimalist style as its owner. Her unique, clean scent hung in the air. When I came out of the shower, she was already in bed, her back to me, pretending to be asleep. But I could feel the tension in her body, the slight quickening of her breath. She was nervous. I felt a little awkward myself. We were husband and wife, but this was the first time we would ever share a bed. And my soul was that of a 10,000-year-old being. I laid down gently on the far side of the king-size bed, giving her as much space as possible. We didn't speak a word all night. When I woke up the next morning, her side of the bed was empty, though a faint warmth lingered. She had already left for the office. On the nightstand was a glass of water and a sandwich. I picked up the sandwich and took a bite. It was bland, almost tasteless, but I smiled. I knew, brick by brick, the wall of ice was coming down. For me, I finished breakfast and turned on the TV. A breaking news alert was flashing across the local channel. We interrupt this program with a developing story. Early this morning, prominent local businessman Howard Vanderbilt and his son, Blake Vanderbilt, were arrested by federal agents in connection with a wide-ranging investigation into tax evasion, securities fraud, and racketeering. Authorities reportedly found millions in undocumented cash and gold bars at the Vanderbilt estate. All assets of the Vanderbilt Corporation have been frozen, and trading of its stock has been halted. I turned off the TV. It was all as I expected. The energy I had sent into the truck driver's mind wasn't just a kill switch. It was also a suggestion. In his final moments, he had confessed everything he knew about the Vanderbilt's crimes. The Vanderbilts were finished, and that was just the beginning. Anyone who had ever hurt her, or anyone who was planning to, would pay the price. At Rossi Industries, in the CEO's office, Isabella hadn't slept a wink. Yesterday's events played on a loop in her mind. Ethan's calm demeanor, Blake's terror, the roar of the dump truck, the warmth of his jacket on her shoulders. She was realizing she couldn't see through this man at all. "Ms. Rossi," The bidding for the Southbridge project starts at 2 p.m. Our proposal, her assistant said, knocking and entering, her face etched with worry. Isabella rubbed her temples. Blake was gone, but the crisis wasn't over. Without a partner, Rossi Industries didn't have the capital to win the bid. And the Lee family from the state capital was still a huge threat. Was she really going to have to give up? She couldn't accept that. This was the first major project since her grandfather's death. She had to prove she could protect his legacy. Just then, her office door opened. I walked in carrying a thermal lunch container. "What are you doing here?" she asked, surprised. "Brought you lunch," I said, placing it on her desk. "I made the same dishes from the other night. I know you like them." Her assistant quietly excused herself, closing the door behind her. The aroma of the food filled the office, easing some of her anxiety. "How can I think about food at a time like this?" she said, but her body betrayed her as she opened the container. Inside were 4 perfectly arranged dishes, shimmering with a faint, unseen energy. Just the smell of it cleared her head. "Still worried about the Southbridge plot?" I asked, setting out the food for her. She paused, then gave a bitter smile. "What's the use in worrying? We're short $10 billion, and we still have the Leaf family to contend with. We don't stand a chance." She looked up at me, and, as if possessed, she asked, "What you said yesterday about getting $10 billion. Were you serious?" The moment she asked, she regretted it. She must be losing her mind to believe Ethan's crazy talk. $10 billion? How could an unemployed freeloader possibly get that kind of money? I just smiled, pulled a plain black card from my pocket, and placed it on her desk. "This should be enough." Her eyes fell on the card. It was matte black, with no bank logo, just a complex, interwoven crest in gold thread in one corner. "What is this?" "A bank card." "From what bank?" "I've never seen this before." "A small, private Swiss bank. Invitation only," I improvised. In truth, the card was a storage artifact I had crafted from a rare, celestial metal. It held a fraction of the gold and gems I'd collected over the millennia. In this world's currency, it was worth far more than 10 billion. 1,000 billion wouldn't even make a dent. Isabella picked it up, her expression skeptical. "The pin is your birthday," I said. She hesitated, then pulled a card reader from her desk drawer, inserted the card, and typed in the numbers. A moment later, a long string of digits appeared on the screen. She stared, her eyes wide, and counted them again and again. Thousands, millions, billions, tens of billions, balance, $100 billion. Thump! The card reader slipped from her hand and fell onto the plush carpet. She was completely stunned, staring at me as if I were an alien. How is this possible?" she stammered. 100 billion. The entire market cap of Rossi Industries was maybe 20 billion. And her husband, the man she thought was a worthless leech, had just casually produced a card with 5 times that amount. This was a bigger shock than the car crash. "So, the money problem is solved," I said, pushing the card toward her. "Now let's talk about the Leaf family." Isabella was still reeling, unable to process what was happening. I ignored her daze and took out my phone, dialing a number I had acquired with my spiritual sense. The private line of Liam Lee, the patriarch of the Lee family. A deep, authoritative voice answered. "Hello, Liam Lee?" I asked casually. The man on the other end paused, likely surprised that someone would use his full name so informally. "This is he. To whom am I speaking?" His tone grew cautious. "Who I am doesn't matter," I said. "I'm calling to tell you one thing. This afternoon's auction for the Southbridge plot, the Lee family will not be participating." My voice was quiet, but it held an absolute, unchallengeable authority. The line went silent. A few seconds later, I heard a cold chuckle. "You have a lot of nerve, my friend. Who do you think you are? The Lee family wants that land, and we're going to get it. I like to see who's going to stop me." "Is that so?" I laughed softly and flicked a finger. A bolt of spiritual energy traveled along the phone signal, spanning hundreds of miles, and slammed directly into Liam Lee's mind. Far away in his mansion in the state capital, Liam Lee was about to hang up in disgust. Suddenly, he felt as if his brain had been struck by an invisible sledgehammer. Boom! His vision went black. His very soul felt like it was being torn apart. He coughed up a mouthful of blood, spraying it across his antique mahogany desk. He was plunged into a vision of hell, of screaming demons and dying stars. It was a terror that came from the deepest core of his being. He knew, with absolute certainty, that the person on the other end of the line could extinguish his soul with a single thought. This was the power of God. Master, Master, forgive me. All of Liam Lee's arrogance vanished. He screamed into the phone, his voice trembling. I was blind. I didn't know who I was speaking to. Please spare my life. The Port Sterling land, we won't touch it. We won't ever think about it again. In fact, the Lee family will give its full support to Rossi Industries. From now on, whatever Ms. Rossi wants in this state, she gets. Hearing his terrified begging, a cold smile touched my lips. See that you remember that. I hung up. The office was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Isabella stared at me, dumbfounded. She hadn't heard the other end of the conversation, but she had heard my commands. She had just watched me make one phone call, issue a few orders, and that was it? Problem solved? Was this even possible? Just as she was wondering if she was dreaming, her personal cell phone rang. She looked at the caller ID. Liam Lee. Her heart leaped in her throat. She answered, her hand shaking. Liam Lee's voice came through the line, now impossibly humble and respectful. Is this Ms. Rossi? This is Liam Lee. I'm calling about the Southbridge project. On behalf of the Lee family, I would like to formally state that we are withdrawing our bid and will offer our full and unconditional support to Rossi Industries. Furthermore, as a token of our apology, we would like to make a $3 billion investment in your company, no strings attached. And any future business you conduct in this state will have our family's complete protection. All we ask is that you might put in a good word for us with your husband. Isabella was petrified. She held the phone, her mind a complete blank, hearing only the frantic, thunderous pounding of her own heart. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, the auction hall at the Port Sterling Civic Center was buzzing. Every major player in the city's business world was there. They all had their eyes on one prize, the Southbridge plot. When Isabella and I walked in, we immediately became the center of attention. Isn't that Isabella Rossi? I can't believe she still has the nerve to show up. I heard that after the Vanderbilts went under, the Rossi credit line was frozen. How is she planning to bid? And look who she's with. Her freeloader husband. Bringing him to an event like this. She must enjoy being humiliated. The whispers followed us through the room. These people didn't know the real story behind the Vanderbilts' downfall. They just assumed Rossi Industries was the next to fall. Isabella ignored them all. Walking behind me, her heart was hammering against her ribs. She had the money. Her biggest competitor had inexplicably dropped out, but she was still nervous. She had no idea how Ethan had done it. None of it felt real. The auction began. The bidding started at $5 billion. $5.1 billion. A developer called out. 5.2. 5.5. The price climbed steadily, quickly surpassing the $8 billion mark. This was already beyond what most of the companies present could afford. Soon, only a few heavy hitters were left. Isabella's palms were slick with sweat. She glanced back at me, her eyes asking a silent question. I gave her a reassuring nod. She took a deep breath, raised her paddle, and her clear, cool voice rang out across the hall. 10 billion. The entire room went silent. Everyone stared at her as if she had lost her mind. 10 billion. That price was far beyond the land's estimated value. Was she insane? And where did she get that kind of money? Ms. Rossi, are you sure? 10 billion, the auctioneer asked, double-checking. I'm sure, Isabella replied, her voice unwavering. Her confidence was a reflection of mine. The hall erupted in a roar of conversation. Her remaining competitors looked at each other, then shook their heads with bitter smiles and lowered their paddles. The price was too high. It was financial suicide to continue. 10 billion going once. 10 billion going twice. 10 billion sold to Rossi Industries for the development of Southbridge, Plot C01. The gavel fell. Amid a thunderous round of applause, Isabella still felt like she was in a dream. She had done it. She had actually won the bid in the most unbelievable way imaginable. She turned and looked at me. I was smiling at her, my eyes full of warmth and pride. In that moment, she felt there was nothing in the world more reassuring than that smile. As soon as the auction was over, a swarm of reporters surrounded Isabella. Ms. Rossi, how did your company manage to raise $10 billion on such short notice? Ms. Rossi, the Lee family was expected to be your biggest competitor. Why were they a no-show today? Bombarded with questions, Isabella was at a loss for words. I stepped forward, naturally shielding her from the crowd. No comment. I only said 2 words, but my quiet voice carried an authority that made them hesitate. The reporters, surprisingly, fell silent and parted to let us through. I took Isabella's hand and led her out of the hall, leaving a crowd of confused and speculative onlookers behind. It wasn't until we were back in the car that she finally let out a long breath. "Thank you," she said, her voice sincere. "We're husband and wife. You don't have to thank me," I said, starting the car. A blush colored her cheeks. She looked down, but the corners of her mouth turned up in a small, happy smile. The car moved smoothly through the city streets. Isabella felt more relaxed and joyful than she had in years. However, as we passed through a deserted industrial district, several black vans suddenly swerved out from all directions, boxing us in. The doors slid open and dozens of thugs armed with steel pipes and machetes poured out, led by a man with a nasty scar across his face. Isabella's face paled. "Who are they?" "People who don't want us to be alive," I said, my gaze calm as I looked out the window. I could sense something different about these men. They weren't like Blake's hired goons. They were more professional, more vicious. They were killers. "Get out of the car," Scarface yelled, pointing at us with a steel pipe. "Don't be afraid," I said, patting Isabella's hand. I opened my door and stepped out. One man for the lives of everyone in the car. "You've got guts," Scarface sneered, showing a row of yellow teeth. "Too bad our boss said you both have to die." "Who's your boss?" I asked. "You can ask the devil yourself when you get to hell," he roared, waving his hand. "Get in, boys. Kill the man, but leave the woman for us to have some fun with." The thugs let out a series of lewd laughs and charged. Inside the car, Isabella was terrified. I just shook my head. Ants will be ants. The instant the first steel pipe was about to crash down on my head, I moved. My body became a phantom, weaving through the crowd. No one could track my movements. All they heard was a rapid series of sickening cracks and screams of agony. In less than 10 seconds, all of them were on the ground, their limbs broken, writhing in pain. Not a single one could stand. The street was filled with their moans. Only Scarface remained, frozen in place, his vicious sneer replaced by a mask of pure terror. He watched me walk toward him, step by step, until his legs gave out and he fell to his knees. "Sir, mercy. Please, have mercy. We were just hired to do a job," he begged, banging his head on the pavement. "Who hired you?" I asked, my voice as cold as the grave. It was, he hesitated. I lifted my foot and brought it down gently on the fingers he was using to support himself. "Aya!" A blood-curdling scream ripped through the air. His fingers were crushed into pulp. I'll talk, he shrieked, tears and snot streaming down his face. It was Mr. Zhao. Victor Zhao of the Dragon's Head Syndicate. Victor Zhao? The Dragon's Head? I frowned. I remember now. In my past life, after Blake Vanderbilt destroyed Rossi Industries, he sold its assets to this very same overseas crime syndicate. It seemed the Vanderbilts were merely their agents in this country. Now that the agent was gone, the master had come out to play. Where is he? He's at the Apex Club, in the penthouse suite. I nodded. A single chop to the back of his neck, and he slumped to the ground, unconscious. I turned, opened the car door, and said to the utterly stunned Isabella, "Wait here for me. I'll be right back." Before she could reply, I vanished into the night. The Apex Club, penthouse suite. A young man in a floral silk shirt and a thick gold chain had his arms around 2 glamorous models. He was sipping wine and watching the events on the street via a drone feed. This was Victor Zhao. When he saw me take down his men like I was swatting flies, the smile on his face froze. "Shit, what the hell is that monster?" he yelled, shoving the women away and jumping to his feet. "Mr. Zhao, what do we do now?" A subordinate asked, panicked. "What do we do? We run." Victor grabbed a briefcase from the table and made for a hidden escape route. But as he turned, he ran straight into a solid chest. Somehow, I was already there, standing in front of him like an apparition. How did you get up here?" Victor's face was a mask of terror. This was the top floor. The only elevator required a key card, and the stairwell was guarded by a dozen of his best men. I wanted to be here, so I came. I said simply, "Friend, let's make a deal. Name your price. Just let me walk out of here. In this case, with $50 million in cash is all yours." Victor shoved the briefcase toward me, trying to buy his life. I looked at him and smiled. "Money. What I want is something you can't give." I reached out and wrapped my hand around his neck, lifting him off the ground with one arm. Victor's face turned purple as his feet dangled in the air. You can't kill me. My father is the head of the Dragon's Head." "The Dragon's Head?" I shook my head. "In my eyes, it's nothing." I applied a little pressure. Crack. Victor Zhao's head lolled to one side. He was dead. I dropped his body to the floor like a bag of trash. Then I turned to face a silent, elderly man in a silk jacket who had been sitting in the corner of the room the entire time. From the moment I entered, he had kept his eyes closed, as if the world around him didn't exist. But I could feel a faint wisp of true energy, qi, radiating from him. He was a martial artist, a master of internal energy. Among mortals, he was at the pinnacle of power. "You're not afraid of me?" I asked him. The old man slowly opened his eyes. His gaze was sharp as a razor. He looked at the body on the floor, then at me, and sighed. "What use would fear be? Your skill is beyond this world. I am no match for you. You're a practical man. I was merely in the employ of the Zhao family. My services were paid for. Now that my employer is dead, our contract is terminated," the old man said, standing and giving me a slight bow. "Farewell." He turned to leave. "Did I say you could go?" I asked quietly. The old man froze, his face grim. "What more do you want?" "You can leave," I said. "But first, you're going to tell me something." "Please ask." 3 years ago, Isabella Rossi was in a car accident. Was at your work. I had asked Blake this, but he denied it to his dying day. The old man's eyes widened in surprise, and then he fell silent. "So it was you," I said, my voice filled with killing intent. "It wasn't me," the old man said quickly. That was arranged by someone else." "Who?" "It was Isabella Rossi's mother, Maria." Boom. The words exploded in my mind. "What did you just say?" I took a step forward, and my aura washed over him. The old man gasped for breath, his face pale, sweat pouring down his forehead. "It's the absolute truth," he choked out. "Back then, Maria Rossi came to us. She paid us $5 million to break one of her daughter's legs. She said only if Isabella was crippled would she finally listen, give up the company, and agree to marry Blake Vanderbilt. We were just following orders, but we never expected some stupid kid to rush out and push her out of the way. He took the full impact of the car." The old man kept talking, but I couldn't hear him anymore. A single, furious thought consumed me. Maria. It was Maria who tried to murder her own daughter. And that stupid kid who saved her. That was me. The me from my past life. I remembered. The car crash. I pushed her to safety and ended up with a dozen broken bones, nearly dead. At the hospital, I gave her a massive blood transfusion that pulled her back from the brink. But when I woke up, Maria told me that it was Blake who had saved Isabella, Blake who had given her his blood. She gave me $1 million to shut my mouth and let Blake take the credit. She said it was the only way Isabella would ever be grateful to him, the only way she would agree to the marriage. And the old me, pathetic and weak, wanting only what I thought was best for Isabella. I agreed. So I became the villain. And Blake Vanderbilt became the hero. From that day on, Isabella's heart was closed to me, her feelings turning from indifference to pure, cold disgust. So that was it. That was the root of all the pain. Ha ha, ha ha ha. I threw my head back and laughed, a sound filled with endless rage and sorrow. A terrifying aura erupted from my body. Every window in the penthouse suite shattered simultaneously. The old man was thrown against the wall by the force of it, coughing up blood as he stared at me in horror. Demon. I ignored him. My body flickered and I vanished. When I got back to the car, Isabella saw the murderous look in my eyes and shrank back. "Ethan, what happened?" I looked at her, at the face that had haunted my dreams for 10,000 years. I reached out and gently touched her cheek. "Bella," I said, my voice raw. "I'm sorry." "Sorry for what?" she asked, confused. I didn't answer. I just pulled her into a fierce embrace. Feeling her warmth, the beat of her heart against my chest, the storm inside me finally began to calm. I'm sorry for letting you suffer so much. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you in our last life. This time, I won't let anyone hurt you. Not a single soul. Not even your own mother. When we arrived home, Maria was pacing anxiously in the living room. Bella, where did the auction go? Did you get it? She asked, her only concern being the bottom line. Isabella was still in a daze and just nodded faintly. Maria's face lit up. Wonderful. I knew my daughter was the best. So what if the Vanderbilts are gone? The Rossi family is still on top. Did the Lee family cause any trouble? No. Good, good, Maria said, patting her chest. She then shot me a dirty look. I suppose you were good for something today, playing chauffeur. But don't get any ideas. As soon as this is over, you two are finishing that divorce. Isabella's expression hardened, and she started to speak, but I stopped her. I looked at Maria and said calmly, Mom, there's something I need to talk to you about. I have nothing to talk about with you, she snapped. It's about Bella's car accident. 3 years ago. My words struck her like a bolt of lightning. The color drained from her face, her eyes wide with panic. What? What are you talking about? I don't know anything about a car accident, she stammered. Don't you? I sneered. Should I invite the man from the Dragon's Head Syndicate, the one you paid $5 million, to come here and refresh your memory? Maria swayed on her feet, nearly collapsing. She stared at me as if I were the devil himself. How could he know? She had been so careful. Not even her husband had known the truth. Isabella was frozen. She looked at me, then at her mother's terrified face. A horrible possibility began to form in her mind. Mom, is what Ethan said true? She whispered, her voice trembling. The car accident 3 years ago. Did you arrange it? No, it wasn't me. Bella, don't listen to him. He's trying to drive a wedge between us. Maria shrieked, shaking her head frantically. Enough, I roared. You paid $5 million to have your own daughter crippled, just to force her to marry Blake Vanderbilt. When the car came, it was me who pushed her out of the way. I was the one who was hit. At the hospital, it was my blood that saved her life. And it was you who paid me $1 million to keep my mouth shut and let Blake take all the credit. Every word was a hammer blow, striking Isabella and Maria to their cores. Maria crumpled to the floor, her face ashen. And Isabella, after hearing it all, began to tremble violently. She looked at me, and tears streamed down her face. So that's how it was. The person who saved her wasn't Blake. It was the husband she despised, Ethan. The man she had hated and ignored for 3 years was her true savior. She thought about all the cold words, the dismissive glances, the quiet suffering he had endured. An overwhelming wave of guilt and heartbreak crashed over her. With a sob, she sank to the floor and wept like a lost child. The glacier that had encased her heart for 3 long years finally, catastrophically, shattered. I kicked Maria out of the house. I didn't kill her. I just took away her wealth and status. For someone like her, that was a fate worse than death. Sophia, upon learning the truth, had a breakdown and locked herself in her room. The vast estate was once again empty, save for Isabella and me. After she cried herself out, she slept for a full day. When she woke up, her eyes were still swollen, but the way she looked at me was completely different. The ice was gone, replaced by a deep, tender warmth and profound remorse. I'm sorry, she whispered. It was the hardest and most sincere thing she had ever said. I shook my head and took her hand. It's all in the past now, and it was 10,000 years of waiting had finally come to an end. From that day on, everything changed. She was no longer the aloof CEO, and I was no longer the pathetic husband. She started acting like a normal wife, making me breakfast in the mornings. It was still terrible, but she tried. When she came home from work exhausted, I would massage her shoulders, using my energy to soothe her fatigue. We went on dates, saw movies, and did all the things normal couples do. The smiles on her face became more frequent, and she leaned on me more and more. The business world of Port Sterling was abuzz with rumors of a mysterious Mr. Chase who had become the silent force behind Rossi Industries. No one knew where he came from, only that he seemed capable of anything. Business rivals who challenged the Rossi family would mysteriously vanish or have their companies collapse overnight. Everyone speculated, but no one ever found a single clue about my identity. Only Isabella knew that this man, who was like a god to the outside world, was just a husband who would smile at the sound of her voice. One evening, we were curled up together on a lounge chair on the balcony, watching the stars. "Ethan," she murmured, her head on my shoulder. "Who are you, really? It feels like you know everything, like you can do anything." I knew this question had been on her mind for a long time. I was silent for a moment, then decided to tell her a part of the truth. "I've lived a very long time," I said, my eyes on the cosmos. "I've been to places you can't imagine and seen things you wouldn't believe." I held out my hand, palm up. A small, golden flame flickered to life in my palm, casting a warm glow on our faces. Isabella's eyes went wide with wonder, but she didn't scream or pull away. She reached out a hesitant finger and gently touched the flame. It was warm, but it didn't burn. She looked at me, not with fear, but with a profound understanding. She finally knew why I was such an enigma. "We weren't from the same world." "Are you an angel?" she whispered. I smiled, extinguished the flame, and pulled her closer. "No, I'm just a man who's been in love with you for 10,000 years. She froze, and then her eyes welled up with tears again. She didn't ask what I meant. She just held on to me tightly, as if trying to merge with me. She knew there were still secrets, but she didn't care. As long as I was with her, that was all that mattered. Suddenly, a jolt went through me. I looked up sharply, my gaze piercing the northern sky. Out there, in the deep darkness, I felt a familiar, malevolent energy flicker for an instant. It was an energy that didn't belong to this world. It belonged to the world of cultivation, and to one of my oldest enemies. The planet's dormant spiritual energy was beginning to awaken at an unnatural rate. It seemed the quiet days were over. Isabella sensed the change in me. "What is it?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. I looked back down at her and smiled, my expression softening. "Nothing," I said, stroking her hair. My eyes were gentle again, but deep within them, a cold, murderous light was gathering. "I was just thinking the things are about to get a lot more interesting. Let them come. Demons, gods, it didn't matter. Anyone who dared to disturb the life I had built with my wife would be utterly and completely erased. This time, I wouldn't just protect her. I would bring her with me to the very pinnacle of this world, and together, we would watch the galaxies burn." 1 year later, Rossi Industries, CEO's office. "Ms. Rossi, here is the Q3 financial report you requested," the new assistant said, placing the file on the desk. She secretly studied the legendary businesswoman. She was so beautiful, so elegant, but so cold. The assistant felt like the temperature in the room had dropped 10 degrees. "Fine, leave it," Isabella said without looking up. The assistant, relieved, was about to flee, but just then the office door swung open. Ethan walked in carrying a lunch container, a wide grin on his face. "Honey, I brought you that chicken soup you love." The assistant's jaw hit the floor. She watched in stunned silence as her Ice Queen boss instantly melted. A smile so brilliant it could outshine the sun spread across Isabella's face. She actually got up from her desk, ran to the man, and threw her arms around him like a teenager. "You're here. I missed you so much," she cooed. And then, right there in front of her, they started kissing. The assistant felt her brain short-circuit. Was this the same ruthless, cold-hearted CEO from the business journals? This was a woman head over heels in love. The rumors were all lies. Ms. Rossi wasn't an ice queen at all. She was a volcano, but only for her husband. The assistant covered her face and ran from the office, her entire worldview shattered.